Good morning, and thank you for joining us. My name is Brent Lakeman. I'm the Director of the Hydrogen Initiative with Edmonton Global. I'd like to start off by acknowledging that we are hosting this event on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional gathering place and centre for trade for many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. We recognize that inclusivity is at the heart of sustainable growth and understand that Indigenous partnerships and voices must be at the forefront of radical transformation for our region. This webinar is timely as the climate change COP talks are taking place next week in Glasgow, and discussions around the net zero future, and hydrogen has a key role to play in any net zero forecast. And this reflects the importance of scaling up hydrogen use quickly. To kick off this session, we've asked Mark Lee Wilson, Hydrogen Hub leader for the Transition Accelerator and the go-to person for the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub, to give a quick overview of the work they've been doing. The Hub, which was only announced this past April, is an alliance of government, Indigenous, academic, and economic development leaders to kickstart the Edmonton region's hydrogen economy and ensure long-term economic competitiveness as the world shifts to a low-carbon future to address climate change. So Mark, can you tell us a bit more about the base case for the Hub?
Yeah, thanks, Brent, and thanks for giving me this time to talk about the hydrogen opportunities in the Edmonton region. So today I'll talk about the base case for the region, which is a description of an optimized, self-sustaining future hydrogen economy, looking forward about 10 years to 2032. We developed the base case through deep techno-economic analysis and structured engagement with key industry and non-industry stakeholders. But first, I'll provide a little bit of context around hydrogen. The shift in dialogue in the past few years from emissions reduction to achieving net zero emissions has fundamentally changed the approach that we must take to the challenge. Looking at our energy system in Canada, it's impossible to incrementally reduce emissions to zero within this system structure. A structural change is needed. And this is changing how decisions are being made in businesses and governments alike. It's real, it's happening, and there are countless examples around the world, and it's mandated by our government and crucial other governments around the world. As a result in this shift in thinking, hydrogen will form a part of our net zero emissions future in important sectors where decarbonization is difficult, impractical, uneconomical, or operationally prohibitive, like heavy-duty transportation, think big trucks, freight, locomotives, buses, but also large heating demands such as those that we see in our northern climate. So hydrogen then is a complementary pathway to electrification on our journey to net zero. The Edmonton region has a real structural competitive advantage for producing the lowest cost, lowest carbon hydrogen in the world. All the ingredients are here: expertise, motivated companies, and the experience with existing assets that are producing hydrogen and capturing and sequestering carbon dioxide at scale right now. This structural advantage is a foundation that has been built up over many years. So we have a huge opportunity to leverage this advantage for significant environmental and economic benefits. But we need to construct a new value chain to do this, and how it gets constructed determines the cost and economic viability of the value chain and whether or not it fully levers the competitive advantage. But done right, we can start in Edmonton and build additional hydrogen value chains along energy corridors. So the approach that we've been taking is to developing deep techno-economic analysis that is regionally specific, and then engaging with key stakeholders to inform and refine the analysis. We've set up active working groups with organizations that intend to adopt hydrogen, which is creating new market demand. And we've conducted extensive market sounding on the supply side, which has many ambitious, willing, and capable participants. In total, we've been engaging over 100 organizations. And on the whole, the leadership team and management team of the Hub, which includes representation from all levels of government, as well as much of industry and other key stakeholders, have endorsed and support the analysis and the results. So in our analysis, we've taken a value chain approach, identifying sectors of the value chain and analyzing inputs, outputs, and the economics for each value chain sector. We've created analysis modules for each sector and sharing the results with key stakeholders in the sectors, and we've iterated the models based on their feedback. So what we found is the opportunity for hydrogen in the region goes beyond production and industrial use. It includes the domestic market, which is sizable, offering a unique opportunity to build a new value chain as we transition to a new future-focused net zero energy system. But the value chain is new and not yet economically viable. There are economic gaps and challenges that need public support, funding, and clear direction from our public leaders and governments at all levels. We've also found that the transportation sector is the closest to economically viable because this sector pays a 3 to 5 times price premium per unit of energy versus natural gas. So creating demand should be our primary objective, especially in sectors that are closest to economically viable. So we begin by looking at the regional assets. Where are the existing major commercial, municipal fueling locations? Where are the fleet bases that support these stations? What other assets can contribute to demand? Natural gas blending gates, power generation sites, and large energy-consuming buildings. And finally, what production and supply assets are in the region to support this demand? Getting into all the details of the analysis would take hours, but we have analyzed many of these assets, and we've engaged with many of the asset owners to come up with a viable 2032 demand scenario. And we've costed it. The models are able to break down demand into number of vehicles, fueling stations, pipelines, and so on by year to help us plan what we need to do in the coming years. We've identified investment gaps investment requirements in the range of $10 to $12 billion out to 2032, and an investment gap in the $2 billion range. This is why looking at economic viability is important, as we're going to need to close this economic gap as efficiently as possible. We're also able to break the Edmonton region down into manageable chunks and have a look at what is and could be in each area. Even though setting discrete boundary conditions around an energy system like this is difficult, it does allow us to describe the areas quantitatively. And we can drill down deeper yet into each of the assets, into each of the areas, and map out potential deployments of projects, identify specific opportunities, barriers, and challenges. But where are we now? Well, there are many pilot and demonstration projects in the works and on the go. There's been many millions of dollars invested already in these critical early steps down the pathway to a viable hydrogen economy. And there are many more projects that will need to be launched as we move from pilot phases and demonstration phases into adoption and full-scale commercialization. So what are we doing next? We need to continue refining the base case so we can detail out first steps, identify key projects along viable pathways, and we need to focus on creating demand and making it economical. But we also need to look at de-risking infrastructure investments. We're re-engaging companies right now, probing for real interest and real leadership from capable early movers. And we continue to engage at all levels of government to help find certainty and close the economic gaps. Thanks for your time. I hope that provided a good foundation for the ensuing panel discussion. I'll pass it back over to you now, Brent.
Great, thank you, Mark. And if anyone does have questions for Mark, please drop them into the Q&A section, and we'll get to them in the roundtable during the second half of this event. So now I'd like to introduce our next panelist, Mark Plamendon, who is the Executive Director of Alberta's Industrial Heartland Association. Good morning, Mark, and thanks for being here. For anyone who's been following...
Thank you, Brent. I appreciate the opportunity.
For anyone who has been following the business news over the past 6 months, it's been a very exciting time. The Edmonton region, and in particular Alberta's industrial heartland, has been at the center of a number of announcements regarding plans by local and multinational companies to produce a variety of commodities, all linked to net zero targets. Now, Mark, what are the key drivers for all these recent investment decisions, and specifically in hydrogen production?
Thanks, Brent. And as you said, yes, it's an exciting time. There's been a number of announcements of world-scale companies announcing studies to look at hydrogen and hydrogen carrier production projects here in Alberta's industrial heartland. And these opportunities are underpinned by competitive advantages that really have been the same advantages that have led to growth of this region for the last number of years, growing it into Canada's largest hydrocarbon processing region. The first and foremost of these advantages is access to abundant, low-cost feedstocks. Now, one of the pathways for hydrogen production is to use methane from natural gas to produce hydrogen and then capture carbon dioxide emissions on the back end. And so access to low-priced natural gas is one of the strongest advantages that we have here. And just in comparison, I mean, the U.S. Gulf Coast is able to export significant quantities of natural gas into global markets. So already the U.S. Gulf Coast is advantaged from a natural gas standpoint. And compared to the U.S. Gulf Coast, here in Alberta, prices are significantly discounted. If I look at the last 5 years on average, monthly pricing of natural gas relative to U.S. Gulf Coast, there's at least a 35% discount on natural gas pricing here in Western Canada. So a tremendous cost advantage from natural gas feedstock standpoint. Second significant competitive advantage is access to carbon capture and storage infrastructure and pore space. The geology that sits beneath the ground here in Alberta, and particularly in Alberta's industrial heartland, is conducive for significant quantities of carbon capture and storage. In fact, since 2015, there's been significant quantities of CO2 stored here in Alberta's industrial heartland. So, you have low-cost feedstock, carbon capture and storage. Those two advantages are really key for the hydrogen economy. And then on top of that, you have all the other things offered here in the industrial heartland. Skilled workforce, abundance of flat land that's conducive for heavy industrial investment, supportive community, government supports, and a number of things that really adds to the competitive advantages of this region.
Great, thanks, Mark. And so, in addition to hydrogen production, what are the other types of heavy industries that might have large energy requirements that could be attracted to this region based on those attributes you just talked about?
Yeah, so we're involved in talking with companies globally about their next capital project and their next opportunity, and so we can't have a conversation in this day and age without talking to companies about carbon capture, net zero, and how their next project is going to really help reduce overall global emissions. And so all of the companies and all the projects we're looking at, whether it's petrochemicals and petrochemical derivatives, fertilizer production, specialty chemicals, and even mineral processing and refining, all sorts of heavy industrial applications can utilize hydrogen and carbon capture and storage technologies and opportunities that are offered here in Alberta's industrial heartland.
So, as well, would there be limits to how much hydrogen or ammonia can be produced in this region? Can you give us an estimate of what's the ultimate potential here?
Well, the potential is significant. So first of all, from a natural resource standpoint, the amount of natural gas resources that are available here in Western Canada are measured in centuries, not years or decades. So significant quantities of natural gas. There's no shortage anytime soon with natural gas, as well as with pore space and geological capability for carbon capture and storage. So those two areas, there's significant potential. Where the pinch points come in is, of course, with infrastructure in order to get resources to the desired areas, and that comes with capital investment. As a project looks to invest in the region, they're studying what incremental infrastructure is needed to get the natural gas to site and to get hydrogen to markets, and that all comes with investment.
Great, thank you, Mark. I'd like now to introduce Malcolm Bruce, CEO of Edmonton Global, to talk about where he sees opportunities for the Edmonton region to benefit from other parts of the hydrogen value chain beyond production. Malcolm, how big is this opportunity?
Thanks, Mark, or Brent. I really appreciate the opportunity. And to put it in real sort of short, hard numbers, is the regional opportunity is about $100 billion in the hydrogen space. And the global opportunity in hydrogen is about $2.3 trillion. And as you know, we are one of the few jurisdictions that can really scale to meet the global demand. And I'll just give an example. So it goes back to Mark's point about the know-how and the skill sets here. The old adage that all roads lead to Moscow, well, all pipelines lead to Edmonton. And if you ever look at a pipeline map in this country, you'll see that much of the pipeline infrastructure in a major way is in and around and emanates from the Edmonton Metropolitan Region. And so if you think about Europe, when they're looking at their hydrogen plans, they're looking at building out upwards of 40,000 kilometers of hydrogen pipeline in Europe. So the opportunities for our companies here to be able to provide that kind of know-how and expertise into Europe is significant.
Great. So what about areas like manufacturing, and in particular heavy-duty vehicle manufacturing, like the sector that Mark Lee Wilson highlighted in his presentation? This hasn't historically been a strong sector here. Is it realistic to think we can develop this part of the value chain here in the Edmonton region?
Well, I think we've got to capitalize on what our strengths are. So in the Edmonton Metropolitan Region, we have the second largest fabrication manufacturing capacity in North America. Houston has the largest. So I think there are parts of the value chain that we can accelerate and build here. And then when you incorporate it in things like the foreign trade zone, where you have take advantages of opportunities through federal government programming where you can import-export here in a duty-free way, I think there's significant opportunities to enhance the manufacturing capacity that we have here. And I just put it in a number sake. So it's not about manufacturing, it could be also about assembly. And I know there are concerns around the connectedness that we have, but I think when you look at how we are connected globally through rail, road, there are opportunities here. Mark Lee Wilson was talking in the neighborhood of 20,000 vehicles by 2032 to be converted to hydrogen. That's a significant amount of fleet conversion that needs to occur between now and then. So why can't we do the engine replacements that are converting out of diesel to hydrogen here? I think there are opportunities.
Thanks, Malcolm. Mark also talked a bit about the hub approach. From your perspective, what's different about a hub approach from our past attempts at building industrial clusters in Alberta, in this region specifically?
Well, what I like about the hub is it's looking at the full value chain. The intent of the hub is to establish a hydrogen economy in the Edmonton region, full stop. So that looks at the full value chain. And what it also allows us to do, so from supply to the infrastructure, as Mark highlighted, to the demand. And the demand is really the key for us in establishing this as a viable, robust hydrogen hub, because we need to accelerate demand so that we can bring the necessary production online so we can establish that fulsome community. The other thing I like about the hub is the nature of if we refer back to the governance structure that was there, we have a very inclusive partnership that are building this out between Indigenous peoples that are here, the governments at all levels of business, and then other partners that are driving towards this inclusive outcome of a hydrogen economy for the Edmonton region.
So the organization CBRE recently ranked the Edmonton region as North America's fastest growing tech ecosystem. How does this and our regional strengths in things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, give us an advantage in this area around hydrogen?
Well, it goes back to the advanced manufacturing. I think there are things that we are doing here, whether it be already existing clean tech that we're building into our energy systems that are here, to applying new technologies like artificial intelligence into our systems that allow for efficiency to grow. So your inputs remain the same, but you're creating greater outputs on the other end from a business perspective. And then there's other things, right? There are financial services that were here. Most folks don't realize that the Edmonton Metropolitan Region is the second largest financial district in Canada, behind Toronto. So when you talk about financial services, when you talk about those supporting services like accounting firms and lawyers and those kind of things that enable this to occur, they're all here. And then finally, the only other one that I think is very important is logistics. And transportation logistics is a key enabler to movement of goods, people, and services. And they are really where this all comes together. And lastly, I will highlight talent. And Mark mentioned it, I've mentioned it previously, but we have 7 post-secondary institutions here. We have the largest polytechnic in here. We have a university that's ranked 81 globally for R&D out of the University of Alberta. So I think when it comes time for your future growth, you can find your talent here to drive that outcome that we're looking for, particularly in innovation and new outcomes.
Great, thanks, Malcolm, and we really appreciate your insights. And again, to our audience, we will have time for questions and answers, so please include your questions in the chat function, and we'll be getting back to those with all of our panelists. So this is also a great segue to our next panelist, Heather Campbell. Heather is the Executive Director for Clean Technology at Alberta Innovates. Heather, thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks very much, Brent. In my work with Alberta Innovates, I come to you from Calgary, Mohkinstsis, where I live as a guest on the traditional Indigenous lands of Treaty 7 and Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. For those that don't know, I know we have a global audience today, Alberta Innovates is Alberta's oldest and largest research and innovation organization, and the first of its kind in Canada.
Great, thanks, Heather. And you've had more than 25 experience in the clean technology sector. From your perspective, what is it about the hydrogen opportunity that's really exciting for you in the innovation system?
Absolutely, thanks, Brent. To be quite frank, Canada's oil and gas sector is Canada's largest emitting sector, accounting for about 26% of Canada's emissions. So without further action, emissions from oil and gas sector are projected to increase. Globally, consumers, business investors, citizens are increasingly giving preference to cleaner fuels and investments. To remain globally competitive, Canada's energy industry has to combine and continue to innovate to reduce emissions. And a number of major oil and gas industry players have pledged to make their Canadian operations net zero. Canada's hydrogen strategy sets out a really innovative path for integrating low-emitting hydrogen across the Canadian economy. Hydrogen, as per this conversation, is one of Canada's most exciting economic transformation opportunities. It'll help businesses grow, it'll dramatically reduce emissions in the industrial sector, and it'll enable a new Canadian competitive advantage in a low-carbon economy. It's an ambitious strategy that Canada's put together. It sets us on a path for net zero by 2050. It's about generating economic opportunities, and it's a strategy that was developed much like the comments that Malcolm said in terms of the Edmonton Global Hub. It had full engagement across leading technical experts, stakeholders, provincial and territorial partners, Indigenous business and communities. What's different now, I would say, is that technology has advanced for production and use of hydrogen to the degree that it's now commercially viable. If you wanted to put an analogy in place, solar panels have been around since the 70s, if not the 60s. But it wasn't until we had new materials and new production technologies that were able to advance the stage at where conversion of solar energy into power generation was sufficient to make it economic. And now you've got exponential and, for that matter, asymptotic growth in that sector.
Great, thank you, Heather. And what specifically are some of the things that Alberta Innovates is doing to accelerate this transition towards hydrogen, both on the production side, but also the use side?
Absolutely. So, innovation is key to growing the economy and expanding markets and creating better opportunities for Albertans. Clean technology, of course, addresses sustainability while creating that opportunity for economic diversification in Alberta. As the largest research and innovation energy agency in Alberta, Alberta Innovates works with a range of sectors and industry. We basically act as a convener, and we bring together the research and innovation players to reduce those barriers and increase the adoption and spread of innovations. We take a multi-pronged approach through investments, connections, technical expertise, applied research services, and helping set that innovation agenda. Right now, we need to think about this in terms that innovation needs to extend beyond the tangible technology. And that's the royal we often fail to develop the regulatory framework and the business model answers simultaneously with the actual technology. In Alberta, we're trying to use the concept of an innovation sandbox where you collaborate in a safe space. And it's a safe space to fail and a safe space to succeed as well for the technology, the business model, the regulatory framework, and all three of those together, that's not punitive. Back to you, Brent.
Okay. So thanks, everyone. And one of our goals in the region, you mentioned Sandbox, is really to make the Edmonton region a global epicenter for the hydrogen economy. And can you be a little more specific about anything that you see in the innovation space that's happening to help make this possible?
Absolutely. Practically, and as Malcolm gave you all the statistics for, Alberta, and in particular the greater Edmonton area, is one of the largest production centers of industrial hydrogen, mainly used for petrochemicals and refining. Alberta is in the early stages of understanding and evaluating hydrogen as an opportunity. We can make, of course, hydrogen from our fossil fuel resources, and we can, of course, manage the CO2 output by storing it through carbon capture, utilization, and storage, or divert that divert that CO2 to other uses. Hydrogen, of course, can be used as clean transportation fuel, and of course to power electric grids. Alberta is developing a hydrogen strategy, and it has been really well guided and supported by Alberta Energy, and that's housed within the natural gas strategy and vision. When we think about the existing mature technologies, Alberta has advantages that allow it to be a successful producer of hydrogen. It's that deep experiencing in making and distributing hydrogen, the geological storage space that's owned by the province that can provide permanent storage for on power about 90% of the CO2, that byproduct of that hydrogen production. Right now, we're able to produce amongst the world's least expensive low carbon hydrogen. And we have a strong research and innovation community. And of course, that existing oil and gas sector and economy experience that can be pivoted to deploy in a hydrogen economy. I think I would personally like to see really strong demonstration of hydrogen happening as an energy storage tool as well.
Sure, thanks, Heather. And maybe we already have had some questions around how we can engage different communities. Could you just respond very briefly to what we're doing, what we're seeing in the innovation system around engagement of different segments of the population, whether it's Indigenous communities or women in science, women in engineering, for example?
Sure, Brent. As the woman on this call, I'll take the inclusion question, but I think it's important to recognize, first of all, that that's a shared accountability in terms of looking at equity-seeking groups and their inclusion in a clean technology system. Realistically, we need to work actively on big picture cooperation. Clean technology doesn't flourish jurisdictionally. Broad cooperation is needed, and that means we need to think about including all groups. If we could close the gender gap in innovation and technology, the global economy would be lifted by an estimated 10 to 17 trillion. For investors, it provides a 35% higher return generated by women-led startups. Ensuring that Canada, Alberta's, Calgary's, for me, energy transformation is authentically inclusive is a focus for me. We need to have incremental women in STEM fields, especially in engineering, in my view. That will facilitate women participating in and leading the energy transformation. Many of the solutions that are required for energy transformation are engineering solutions. So as an example, energy storage and the corresponding technology development to enable it can contribute to energy independence, energy access, energy equity, and energy affordability, and particularly for Indigenous and remote communities. Women are drawn to clean technology in higher percentage, relatively speaking, but are still significantly underrepresented in clean technology, as demonstrated by this conversation. But, when I think about a pandemic that has so dramatically impacted women, people of color, and those who live the intersectional realities of those identifiers. So, hey, not a kooky academic theory at all, Premier. Clean technology and transformation and energy transformation is our opportunity to build back better. And in my world, better means more inclusive.
Great, thanks, Heather. One of the global leaders in hydrogen transportation systems is Tokyo-based Mitsui, and we're very excited to be joined this morning by Kaoru Sakaguchi, the General Manager for Mitsui Canada's mobility business. Kaoru, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us this morning.
Thank you so much for inviting me to share our activities on hydrogen. It's truly an honor to participate on this panel.
So what are some of the trends that you're following, and what are you most excited about from the perspective of the energy transition and hydrogen in particular?
I am responsible for the mobility business in Canada, so I am naturally focused on the demand creation side of the equation. I know that Canada will shift to all zero-emission vehicles by 2025 and 2035 for new vehicles sold here. So this is a huge opportunity, and I'm really excited about it. Still, we see some challenges. Hydrogen fuel infrastructure is still virtually non-existent in Canada and requires robust build-out and build-out plan. It'll take some time to convince people to buy hydrogen cars too. In California, we have an investment company called First Element Fuel. Toyota is also working with them and supporting the customers leasing the new Toyota Mirais with 3 years of free fuel. We've seen this kind of movie before, though. It is just like the first phase of Toyota Prius introduction to the market. No one thinks twice about buying a hybrid car today, but it wasn't the case earlier. So market acceptance will take some time, but we all know that's coming.
So, we're talking about how fast things are moving in the Edmonton region, but globally, from your perspective, how fast are things moving in your segment of the hydrogen economy?
What we find interesting is that the cost of pure hydrogen is coming down rapidly. This will help enhance demand in all aspects. 2019, it was $16.51 per kilo in California. Today, Quebec-based company called H2V Energies is putting its green hydrogen on the market for $3.50 Canadian, or roughly US $2.60 per kilogram. In relative terms, though, it will cost about $70.50 Canadian to fill up empty Toyota Camry tank versus $60 a tank with the gasoline. But in the real world, however, I would expect the actual cost to be about twice as much as a cost to cover the cost. There are costs to do a gas compression, and there are costs associated with delivery, but it'd still be 40% cheaper than gasoline, I would think. And also, according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, a green hydrogen cost could hit $2 a kilogram by 2030. And ultimately, though, I believe hydrogen fuel will be less than $1 per kilo. If so, hydrogen will likely be the most competitive energy source. There's so much production coming on stream, so it's kind of hard to predict when this will happen, but I think it happens a lot sooner than we all expect. The major bottleneck, though, is fuel delivery logistics. That's something we need to have a solution for. To answer your question in a long roundabout way, I think things will speed up as the cost of hydrogen comes down. I think it's a simple case of economics for most people and for the businesses.
Great, thank you. So what new business models are being explored, and how can we expect differences from the traditional mobility economy where things like the vehicle and the fuel were quite segmented? What do you see differently in the hydrogen case?
For the hydrogen case, I think we think there are space for both electric and hydrogen, and for the hydrogen vehicles, it's going to be suited for large scale, high utilization, so uptime of 20 hours plus, particularly for long distance travel, and in particular case of Edmonton, I think cold weather applications. So those are the most suited for hydrogen vehicle applications or hydrogen machine applications. And electric vehicles, on the other hand, will still, we need them as well for the shorter commute or last mile delivery type of application. So I think we have a space for both.
Sure. So maybe just finally, what would be your advice for the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub, our community, as companies within our region that are looking to be part of the hydrogen economy? Any suggestions?
I think, unlike the traditional electricity market where you have the power generation plant with a long distance transmission line and the local distribution stream, you will be able to do all that with hydrogen in one place. So hydrogen for us is a play on decentralization of power and reinvention of utilities, since you will be able to make hydrogen almost anywhere. But if you can produce hydrogen at a lower cost than anyone else, as some other panelists have mentioned at the Edmonton, then it would enhance the ability to attract new businesses and investments to the region. It is going to be a major competitive advantage to form a hydrogen-powered industrial cluster. And in this particular case in Edmonton, I think you have a very strong case for that. Hydrogen is also very versatile. So you can also make them or use them in different ways. So you can store them as energy or power machineries, or you could produce a fossil fuel-free chemicals such as fertilizers or even green steel. So possibility with hydrogen is endless. In short, the Edmonton Regional Hydrogen Hub could play a catalyst role in helping us be closer to our customers and contributing to overall GHG emission reduction.
Great. Thank you, Koru. And if anyone has questions for Koru and for the panelists, this is a great chance to get that industry perspective on what's happening globally. Please drop them into the Q&A section, and we'll do our best to answer them during the roundtable session just coming up soon. I'd now like to turn to our final panelist, Ian Payne, who is the Director of Ready Mix Performance for Lafarge Canada. Thanks for being here, Ian.
Yeah, very nice to be here. Thanks.
And so, Ian, you're in a very interesting position as somebody working on the ground here in Edmonton, but also within the context of a multinational parent company, Holcim. And you've been deeply involved in some of the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub's work teams. As the leader in your company's Western operations, how do you approach the hydrogen opportunity?
Well, that's a great question, and I appreciate a little bit of the context that you offered already. On this particular call or panel, I'm one of the few that actually is responsible to put better emissions technology on the ground, like within our business, and find ways to do that. So maybe a little bit more around context. As you mentioned, Holcim is actually the largest building materials company in the world, and we're actually involved in cements, of course, as well as concretes and aggregates, and that kind of a profile gives us a tremendous impetus to move as fast as we can around emissions. So to that end, Holcim has a full net zero map to 2050. Globally, but we also have a 30% reduction map to 2030 that we're trying to translate into every product line and at every country level. So very, very challenging. And within that framework, we're a manufacturer as well as a transporter. Every good we produce, we have to move. A lot of transportation comments have been made already today. On the manufacturing side, most of our focus is around CCUS. Okay, and there's been some really exciting gains there. On the transportation side, and this is where hydrogen fits in, we're exploring multiple ways to repower the fleets that move our goods. Battery-based EVs is part of that conversation as well. We have several full battery system trucks running in Switzerland at this point in time. Natural gas has played a role there in the past, but not as effectively as people would like to believe for industrial fleets. Hydrogen is looking like it has all the right kinds of advantages to address the shortcomings that we see from most other alternative fuel paths. So that's why we're so keen to pursue that hydrogen model and participate in some of the opportunities that are apparent for this Edmonton region in particular.
Great, thanks, Ian. So you spoke about the hydrogen advantages, but could you also speak to the region's advantages that could position our industries for a role in the energy transition?
Yeah, I sure can. And a lot of the advantages have been discussed so far amongst the other panelists as well. It's very clear. It's really about potential synergies. The advantages is that you have all the participants of all ends of the supply chain in a geographic area that's rather compact. And in fact, it all resides within a single provincial framework as well. So arguably, we have all the synergies we need between all the participants that we need, right down to sequestration. And we have a single provincial framework to work within with various agencies. We don't even have to cross borders. So when you look at it from that perspective, if anybody has an opportunity that they can really bring to fruition, it's this geography.
Great. So how do things like environmental, social governance, your ESG metrics drive decision-making for Lafarge?
Okay, so I read that question last night about 6 times and tried to find a way to make it a compact answer. So ESG for Lafarge, and I mentioned cement already. So ESG for Lafarge has become everything for Lafarge. And in fact, even within our industry, the Global Cement and Concrete Association recently, about a week ago, October 15th, I believe, announced a complete framework for 80% of the world's cement and concrete production as a single association toward net zero by 2050. The first major industry to do that on the planet. So and Lafarge, our CEO, is actually the current chair of that effort. So ESG has become everything within the company's cultural fabric. So I'm going to narrow it down a little bit. I'm going to talk about the E part, and instead of using environment, I'm going to talk about sustainability. So sustainability for us now is part of all of our capital processes. We have to demonstrate any capital that we're looking for to deploy, how it affects our sustainability objectives and outcomes. And then the other side, in terms of business metrics and management, as where your question started, we recently implemented measurement systems that are global again for our key product lines that measure emissions for transportation, for scope 1, 2, and 3. Okay, and each of the countries is organizing themselves to make sure that their capabilities are there to report effectively on it. And it's no small task, but we're there already.
Great. Well, thanks, Ian. And we may come back to that in our panel conversation. So now I would like to invite all of our panelists back as we move into the roundtable discussion. So let's start with our industry panelists. Karu, Ian, what are some of the things from your perspectives that governments can be doing to both enable and accelerate the hydrogen economy? Who'd like to go first?
Okay. So
Go ahead, Corey.
Okay, thanks. So I'll go first. I think Canada is like most other countries have ambitious emission reduction targets. There's no doubt that we need hydrogen to get there. But this is not cheap exercise, so that the government must help with this transition and play a core role in creating a new economic foundation. I would say to the government, be ambitious and go big. There's really no in between. So I'm hoping this would be a message for the government. And if the government can support the existing businesses and design to make company more successful than where they are today, then I think buy-in would be much easier. So rather than imposing on them, help them do it in their way. That would be my message.
Further to Karyu's comments about government, I think there's two things that could be done here. Number one is to help grow demand by de-risking. So when we look at any first mover out there that needs to be a first mover or wants to be a first mover, when you start to look at the investments required at that demand side and compared to the risk that you're taking as an early adopter, they're very large. We've got to find a way to bring together a group that helps to de-risk that structure. I think that's the critical part of it. And the second piece I would ask, don't fragment the investments. Don't put $1 here, $10 here, and $1 million there, and think that 100 projects is going to get you the outcomes. I would say that you're going to have to focus your investment into the strong hubs that have the ability to create the mass rather than a fragmented approach.
Great, thanks, Ian. And we have a number of questions that are sort of the area of different hydrogen production approaches, technologies. Question for the panel, and maybe Heather may be the one to start, but could the panel elaborate on some specific plans for the incorporation of green hydrogen sources to supply hydrogen demand, or different technologies for producing hydrogen, and how we look at that within the region, within the province?
Well, maybe I'll actually flip to another clean technology item to bring it back to hydrogen. So when I think about the stream that I lead around clean technology, I also have electricity generation as part of that. So small modular nuclear reactors are part of the conversation. There are specific technologies within small modular nuclear reactors which also enable the production of hydrogen in addition to the electricity. So recognizing that hydrogen is a critical part of Alberta's decarbonization future, you are called to look at things in I want to say collaborative fashion, and think about those overlaps quite tangibly. When we think about items like blending of hydrogen into a natural gas stream for commercial and residential heating, that's something that's understood internationally and happens in Europe. It would be a first of a kind type thing for Alberta. It would require us to make use of that innovation sandbox I talked about earlier to develop the regulatory framework and the market framework to enable that. Right now, we base our we base our payments on heating of natural gas as a heating fuel on the heat content within the natural gas and the heat content of methane. If you were to add hydrogen to that, how does it change, and how does that change the cost of our heating fuel? So there's an example of trying to think about these challenges, not just in the straight technology perspective, but across the board, and all of the I'm going to say arms and legs that come off of that technology to implement it within our daily lives and living.
Sure, and I see maybe Malcolm would like to step in on this.
Thanks, and I just want to reemphasize some of the great work that the hub has done, particularly in the base case model, where they were looking at the life cycle of a truck, like a heavy 18-wheel truck, and they realized that the first 10 years of that truck is when the maximum amount of the mileage gets put on, and thereafterwards it starts to bleed downwards significantly in terms of the amount of kilometers that a truck will put on after that. So the question then is do you convert the whole power pack to a hydrogen fuel cell, or is there some way you can get an integrated fuel system that actually still uses the old diesel cell, but you can start to blend in, much like heat power, blend in hydrogen? And that technology and that research is starting to come on stream now as well with companies that are in this region. So I think there's a lot of innovation going on in this space, and it's really interesting to see how companies are actually trying to solve the problems that we're identifying as we try to build out this ecosystem.
Sure, and any other comments from others on the panel? If not, maybe another question. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ian.
No, you carry on. I'll catch up to Malcolm later on that one.
Okay, again, I know, Heather, you made some earlier comments, but maybe from other panelists, questions we're getting around how Indigenous communities, organizations can best support the hydrogen economy moving forward. Any perspectives, again, from other panelists around that and what we're seeing with respect to the hub or beyond?
Yeah, I'll take that one on. I think what I really, and I think, it goes to Heather's point earlier about inclusiveness, that, we're really going to make transformational change if we bring all the capacity and potential of everybody to this particular challenge. And what I like about the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub is that in the leadership group, we have two chiefs in the First Nations. In the management group, we've got the CEO from the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, and we're looking at how do we build this from the ground up. And we're looking at it from an inclusive perspective. So I'm hopeful that this is going to be a real sort of what I would call a leading by example opportunity, where it's transformational, it's a generational, and I really like the way that we've started the conversation, and I'm really confident that we're going to get to where we need to be with this opportunity.
Sure. Great. Maybe another question, and we had a few also on things like storage technologies. So is the heat and power stream looking at hydrogen storage and salt caverns, for example? Maybe that's a question for Mark or others. Mark Plamendon.
Sure. Thank you, Brent. Well, certainly, again, we're blessed with that advantage here in Alberta's industrial heartland within Edmonton Metropolitan Region, and I didn't mention that sooner. I should have. But the salt formations and the geology that sits below the surface here are perfect for salt cavern storage, and so that not only goes to storage of feedstocks, but also storage of products. It's a very capital efficient way to store products, and so hydrogen storage, again, it's another advantage for hydrogen opportunity here, and a significant one, because not all jurisdictions have the geology for salt cavern storage, and it's a very capital efficient way to store energy products.
So to that end, Alberta Innovates is currently funding and supporting some early stage projects. I'm going to say they're probably in the technology readiness level of sort of 4 to 5 in looking at different storage technologies, including subsurface technology and subsurface storage, of hydrogen for a hydrogen economy.
Great, thank you. And I think, Mark, you wanted to also.
Yeah, so there's two additional points I kind of want to make. So one of them is the Heat and Power Working Group that we have active. So part of the approach that this working group is taking is to identify exactly that. What are the barriers and what are the opportunities? And then how do we go down that path of sort of fleshing it out with actual projects, seeking support from Alberta Innovates and other funders within the region. So, that's definitely something that the group has identified and has discussed and will be moving forward. And then the second is a technical committee that the hub has sort of kicked off as well, that looks at some of the technical requirements, and we'll be having a webinar in the coming months on that.
Great. Thank you, Mark. And again, we're speaking a lot about demand here today, and maybe a question around the time horizon for the development of the hydrogen opportunity and building that demand. Can we talk a little bit more about how we see that demand unfolding, again, whether it's over the next 10-year period or beyond that? Ian, were you?
Yeah, maybe I can start the conversation. Somebody can finish it from a slightly broader perspective. And this is actually toward where Malcolm was in his discussion about commercial fleets, for example. So we feel the work with Hydrogen Hub, for example, it's been clear to us that commercial fleet consumption of hydrogens will be a cornerstone to the broader demand growth in a lot of ways. But one of the challenges that we have is a commercial fleet doesn't last 5 years. And like Malcolm says, the majority of the activity of a truck, for example, is around 10 years. But with technologies that we have, with the way we build trucks now and how we use them, our expectation is that trucks last 15 years. And our roadmap only has 29 years left to go before 2050. So we only have 2 cycles left of kind of fleet renewal to pull in the hydrogen consumption into that fleet. So from a demand side, we need to see demand happen. We need to see that the evolution of the commercial fleets happen quite soon, like very quickly. We can't plan on it happening 5 years from now, or we're actually going to miss our targets. So that demand actually has to happen soon, which is very challenging because when you start talking about things like dual fuels, which was mentioned earlier, the consumption there may not be enough in that format. So we're looking to see if we can make that leap all the way to full hydrogen use in heavy vehicles in order to meet even the 2030 targets.
Sure. So maybe for Koru, then your company is involved in that, and you're looking at the timelines for commercialization. Can you speak to how those line up with the need for quick movement here?
Sure. Obviously, passenger car only come and fill up and maybe every 7 to 10 days. So it doesn't really create a whole lot of demand, and we need the commercial vehicles to take up the slack. If we could, we'd like to see like a transit buses or mining vehicles where they need to come in and fill up every single day. That's the type of services we need. The tricky part right now is even the large Class A trucks with the tanks they have, they could only go 350 miles. Because that's precisely because it's vehicles that fuel at the 350 bar. So we need to go to 700 bar or even higher, pressure point to fill these tanks, and so you get twice as much distance at least. And for that, we need even more investment into fueling stations because 700 bar fueling is different animals than 350 bar fueling. So there's lots of infrastructure side of a bottlenecks we need to solve. On the actual vehicle side, though, like Toyota in Kentucky is now building hydrogen fuel cell package. You could just drop it in engine room. I'm just kind of simplifying it. You still need a tank and battery, but right now there's a kit out there. You can actually convert your trucks to a hydrogen vehicle fairly quickly. So I think this technology is starting to catch up, and we hope we see a lot more of this happen next little while. And for the rail, I think is a huge hydrogen consumption area. Freight trains will need a liquid hydrogen to transport freight across Canada. So that would generate a massive amount of demand for the hydrogen. So yeah.
So we only have a few more minutes for questions, so I'll try and get a couple more in. But one, on the investment side, maybe I'll turn this to Malcolm and Mark Plamendon. What are some of the more near-term investment opportunities that you're seeing for the hydrogen economy in the region? Would like to go
Mark, kick it off, and then Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just start, and then, so, I mean, there's been a number of announcements, as mentioned at the start, with companies studying large-scale export opportunities. So the immediate investment opportunities or projects that we're seeing, that companies have announced to study, would be hydrogen production and then hydrogen carrier production, for example, ammonia, to look to global export markets. Of course, that has a range of challenges around logistics and infrastructure, but that's what really studying these things and figuring out the economics is all about. So, but immediately the immediate opportunities that we're seeing companies announce is the hydrogen production through utilizing methane, whether it's an SMR or an ATR, and carbon capture and storage to produce low carbon hydrogen and low carbon hydrogen carriers.
Great.
So,
Malcolm, what are you seeing?
So from my perspective, domestically, it's building out the demand, and it goes to what Guru has said about, and Ian have both mentioned in terms of the commercial trucking fleets, the public transit fleets. Like, how do you accelerate their conversion so that you're creating a demand that's going to really bulk out the supply chain, and then all the ancillary pieces that support that supply chain, and that includes labor, right? What are the skill sets that we need? What are the capacities we're going to need in the export market space? If we truly want to get to the export market space, we've got to be able to get product to market, and we've got to be able to build the facilities on the coast to be able to then put it onto ships. And then we've got to make sure that the confidence in our in our global marketplaces like Japan, South Korea, California, sign long-term contracts with us, because that then enables the investment dollars that are going to be necessary to build the infrastructure. So our real goal in the market export is to make sure there's confidence in Japan, South Korea, and the like, that we can become a global supplier of their needs for energy for the next 30 years and get them on board to sign those.
Great.
So I'll just add in there that that's going to take some reasonable cooperation across Canada. I'm not aware that Alberta has some coastline. And if we're looking at an export market and having a port that has the infrastructure capability to support an export market for hydrogen, that's going to require Alberta to be collaborative in a technology and policy-making perspective with all of the provinces across Canada to support that. And so the policy expectations to deliver a hydrogen economy are pressing, and I'm going to say the relationship expectations are prescient.
Sure. Well, that's definitely a topic for a future webinar, I think. That's a big issue we do need to get into. But I'd like to take this opportunity now to just turn it back to our panelists very briefly for a chance for any final comments, final thoughts on the discussion that we've had this morning before we move into our next segment. Ian.
Well, I'd say the key here has been touched on is to find ways to work together. I think it's going to be critical that our governments find groups or hubs that have all the components that can work synergistically in a reasonable timeframes to get real achievements, and that's going to mean being open, transparent in all facets. So I think synergy is going to be the critical component.
Great. Karu, final thoughts.
I think this is really exciting, and Edmonton being a gateway to Northern community as well, and there's a potential to give them energy independence. So that's something I look forward to maybe working with Edmonton and maybe tinker about. So thanks.
That's great. Heather.
Thank you. I'm glad my line was able to finish ringing. It's again, I think the key thing is remembering that innovation is more than just the technology, and we need to consider the full landscape of innovation across the market system, about the market base, and across the policy framework and regulatory framework to really deliver a hydrogen economy in Alberta.
Sure. And Mark Plamendon, final thought, brief thoughts.
Certainly, briefly. So as mentioned earlier, I think the global consumer is going to be looking for lower carbon products in their day-to-day lives, and so that drives the interest in hydrogen and carbon capture, and positions our region, I think, very well for that. So I think there's a bright future here. Lots of work to be done, but a bright future.
And Malcolm.
There was a reason why the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub was first established here. Is because it's got all the inputs that we need. So it's really about bringing the rest of the supply chain and the opportunities, both domestically and globally, to other folks. So I'm very, very confident that we can do what we need here, and we've got the skills, the drills, and the opportunity all sitting right here.
Great. Well, thanks everyone, and thanks to the panel. This was a really interesting conversation. And before wrapping up, we'd like to let you know about another exciting event that Edmonton Global is involved in planning and hosting. DMG Events has recently announced that the Edmonton Metropolitan Region will be home to the first Canadian Hydrogen Convention this spring. So David Goris is joining us from DMG to tell us a bit more about the event and perhaps some ways to get involved in it. David, can you tell us more?
Thank you so much, Brent, and it's an honour to be with you all today, and what a wonderful webinar. So thank you very much for having me today. Just a little bit about DMG. Some of you may not have worked with us before, but we're a wholly owned subsidiary of the Daily Mail and General Trust. It's an international portfolio of information, media and events businesses listed on the London Stock Exchange. Our aim is really simple. It's accelerating business through face-to-face events, which is why we work so hard to bring people together and create opportunities for people to network, learn and do business together. So our global division at DMG Events includes a number of high-profile events, including the Global Energy Show, which is held in Calgary every year, and also ADIPEC, which takes place in the Middle East, the largest energy event in the world in November. So a little bit about the Canadian Hydrogen Convention. So as we've all heard today, Canada and especially the Edmonton region is playing a critical role in the development of the global hydrogen economy. And obviously innovators in processes and pioneers in fuel cell technology. We are touting this to be the largest event in Canada showcasing hydrogen as a key enabler to reach net zero emissions by 2050. I think we talked a lot today about the entire hydrogen value chain. So in the event, we'll be having representatives from right through from the energy source, through hydrogen production, transport and storage, and also the end user. And the event will be a really great way for businesses to showcase their products and services to industry representatives from across the globe. We don't want this to be a purely Canadian event. We will be working with key government figures, the Alberta government, Edmonton Global, Invest Alberta, to make this a truly international event to attract investment to the region. So this 3-day event, we're expecting to have 4,000 attendees, around 80 expert speakers, 100 exhibiting companies, and over 400 conference delegates. And a real core pillar of this event strategy is also engagement with our First Nations of Canada. Leaders from First Nations communities will play a really critical role in the preparation and creation of the conference and the exhibition, and will ensure that First Nation participation is strong throughout the event. In ways that people can participate, numerous ways. They can participate on content-related parts of the show, such as the strategic program, the technical courses. We're hosting the Canadian Hydrogen Awards as well. Also, there's customized partnerships where companies can sponsor, companies can exhibit and showcase the work that they're doing to create an incredible hydrogen economy. And finally, Brent, just talking about the governing body, we've got a wonderful governing body which represents a pan-Canadian approach. Brent Lakeman is on the committee, as well as other companies such as H-Tech, Loop Energy, Natural Resources Canada, Air Products, Next Hydrogen, and Alberta Industrial Heartlands Association. But thank you so much for the opportunity. And if anyone wants any further information, please contact me. Thank you.
Great, thank you, David, and we're looking forward to hosting the world here for this and for other upcoming events to shine a spotlight on what's happening here around the hydrogen economy. And please keep an eye on our website and social media at Edmonton Global, where we'll be able to say more about these events. And to our audience, we really appreciate the time you spent with us today, and I hope you found the information useful as well. Any questions we didn't get to, we will follow up with you, and feel free to reach out with any further questions you may have. We'll be sharing a recording of this event, so keep an eye on your email for that. And again, to our panelists, both Marks, Malcolm, Heather, Karu, Ian, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and have a great rest of your day.